So last thing we're going to do with this game is we're going to add instructions when the ball is not moving for the player to start. Now the upside of the way we're doing it is that every time that the player needs to start by pressing space, they're going to know. And that's because we're using the variable that we use to determine whether the ball is moving or not to determine whether to draw the text or not. Okay? Now, it's going to be a little challenging understanding how to actually put the text on screen, because normally, like, there's no draw text block. There is a draw value block. However, the value argument for that block is optional. And actually what we're going to do is I don't think it's optional, but we're going to trick the system into putting nothing there by giving it an empty string. That's what we call it. So, this whole thing is going to be done in the OBJ control block, and specifically we're going to start in the create event, and then we're going to move to the draw event. Okay? Now, because we're only accessing the variables that we're creating in the control object, I'm not going to create global variables. I'm just going to create two new variables using the assign variable block. So I'm going to use just the basic assign variable block. We're going to bring that out. We're going to put it under here. And then I'm going to change, actually I'm going to go ahead and add a second variable because I know I want a second variable. The first one I'm calling fade. And I'm going to leave it as a value of 0. That's going to represent our alpha value that's going to be the transparency of the text when we do the fading of the text. Then we're going to make this one fade and AMT, which is short for amount. The fade amount is how much I am changing the fade variable by to make the fading happen. So this is how much that each time through the draw loop is either added or subtracted from the fade variable before the fade variable is used to set the alpha, which then sets transparency. Okay? Now, it's not the level of transparency that really matters. It's which direction are we going, are we adding or subtracting. To begin with, because fade is starting out at 0, we're going to start the fade amount at a positive value, and because we run at 60 frames per second, or 30 steps per second, because we run at 30 steps per second, we don't want to change it by a whole lot, because that will make the fade go really fast. So this number might seem really low to you, but remember that it's going to be happening 30 times a second. So the number I'm going to use is 0.02, which in terms of percentage, it's changing by about 2% every step. So it'll take about 3 full seconds, a little over 3 full seconds to fade fully in or fade fully out. So a full fade from out to in to out would be a total of about 7 seconds or so. But we're going to start the fade amount as positive because we're starting the fade amount or the alpha value, the fade, at 0. So we're going to start when the program starts, and whenever the ball ends up on the bat ready to be moved, our instructions are always going to fade in, which is also a nice thing, that instead of appearing and then fading out, they'll fade in and then fade out, and then fade in and then fade out. So that's all we're doing in create. We're going to move back to the draw event, and I'm going to go ahead and go all the way to the bottom here. So remember, this whole set of code here from the declare temp on has to do with showing the lives. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring an if variable. So this one here, if variable, and I'm going to bring it and I'm going to drag it to underneath the declare temp, but it's going to jump down below. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to put it beneath the repeat. That way it jumps all the way down below everything. So put it below the repeat, okay, and make sure it's below the repeat and not above the draw sprite transformed, because there's a difference. If you put it below the repeat and it's where your cursor is, it'll jump down below here, which is what we want. This first if statement is checking, is the go variable for the ball false? So we're going to change the variable here because we're in the control object, but we need to reference something from the ball. I got to use dot notation, so I type obj ball dot go, because I want to access the go variable from the obj ball object. Okay, and most of the time, when you want to access a variable from an object, the easiest way to do it is going to be to use dot notation. Dot notation just means name of object dot name of variable. Okay? Because an object is just a collection of variables that all relate to the same thing. And so to access one of those, we call it by first the object's name, and then dot, and then the name of the variable. We're going to leave equal to there because go is either only true or false, so we can be sure it's going to be equal, and in this case we want it to equal false. Because if it equals false, then we want to do all the stuff related to fading. So everything else is going to be attached to this if block. So the first one will just attach to the right, and then everything else we can attach underneath that, and it'll automatically put it inside the if block. So the first thing we're going to go get is we're going to go ahead and set the alpha right away to whatever the fade value is. So I'm going to scroll down to drawing, and we're going to go to this one here. Looks like a little picture. It's called set draw alpha. And I'm going to click and drag it over, and I'm going to attach it to the right of the if variable. Okay? Now I gave you a little preview. If you mouse over, it'll tell you you can set the value from 0 all the way from 0 up to 1. So we know that it's never going to be outside of those two bounds. Now right now we're just going to set it to whatever the current fade value is, which is the fade variable. So I'm going to type the word fade in there. Okay? If I want to, I can click on that. That's as soon as I type the whole thing in, though, I don't need to click on it. But we're setting the alpha value to fade. Fade is the variable that's keeping track of how much we want to either fade it in or out. And again, that's if we think of it like a percentage, fade is going to represent percentages from basically 0 up to 100 in increments of 2. So that sets the actual alpha. Now we need to do all the stuff that's going to change the fade depending on whether we're fading in or out. Well, the first thing we should do is go ahead and draw the actual text while we've got the fade set. So we need to first set the alignment. Click and drag. We're going to go ahead and we're going to make this center and middle. So for horizontal alignment, select center. For vertical alignment, select middle. And that way, whatever coordinates we give are going to be right in the middle of that text. Now on top of that, I want to put it in the middle of the room. How can I find the exact middle of the room? Well, if I have the width of the room, what would horizontally be the middle of the room? if I know the width. What about half the width? And if I know the height of the room, then the middle of the room would be half the height. So when we draw this text, which we're going to do now, so we're going to click and bring over a draw value. Again, there's no draw text block. There's only a draw value. So what we need to do is we need to trick GameMaker into drawing just text. So what we need to do is because we can't not put a value. That's not allowed. But what we can do for value is we can give something that's not going to result in text being put on the screen. And it's as simple as putting two back-to-back quotation marks. Okay? When you put quotation marks back-to-back, GameMaker looks at that and says, oh, that's something. It's called the empty string. It has no text in it, but it's still something, and it's not nothing. So I just put two quotes in the value. And then in the caption, I'm going to put the text that I want. So, and I'm not going to have any spaces around it. So I'm just going to say press space to begin. Or press space to start, I think is what we said. Okay? So press space to start. No spaces around that. No colons or anything, because we're not actually displaying a value. The value is just the empty string. And then we're going to go ahead and put the coordinates that we want this at. Well, we said we want the coordinates to be the exact middle, which horizontally is the room width, but divided by 2. So I'm just going to type in room width divided by 2. Let GameMaker do that math. And then for y, vertically, that's the room height divided by 2. So we're going to do the same thing. Room height divided by 2. So, to review the draw value block, you have to draw a value. However, GameMaker will accept if you put the empty string for a value. That's okay. I could put 0, but if I put 0, it's actually going to draw a 0, which is not what I want. The value I want is, I don't want anything. So I'm putting the empty string. And then I put for the caption, it says press space to start. For x, room height or room width divided by 2. Again, they use underscore to differentiate between two words. So room underscore width, room underscore height, both of those divided by 2. Normally, at some point, I would recommend doing this, or viewing this, but we're not ready to do that yet because if I did this now, we haven't adjusted any of the fade. So what we need to do is just first we need to change the fade variable. So we have to add an assign variable. So click and drag over an assign variable. We're going to change the fade variable. The value is going to be fade amount. And then I'm going to click relative so that we add whatever value the fade amount is to the current fade variable. Okay. So we're adjusting the fade variable by the fade amount. And again, the reason why I'm doing this is I'm trying to separate the value that I used for the transparency from the actual transparency that is being set. Rather than adjust the alpha directly, I'm adjusting a variable that is then being used to set the alpha. So I'm putting in a layer of protection, as it were. Okay. Now, here's where we need to do the check on what is the fade value currently. is the fade value at one of my ends. Okay? Because I can safely assume if I hit 1, that means I am fully faded in. And therefore, I need to start fading out. Which means I need to flip the sign of the variable. So we're going to use the same thing we used earlier for the power-up. We're going to use the switch. Now, the reason why I'm going to use the switch, even though I don't have to, is to get more practice with the switch. But also to provide the option for if somewhere along the line we want to change this and make it have something in between, we can. But I'm going to use the switch. So the switch, remember, scrolling all the way down. There, here we are. So the switch, we need to put the switch in here first. And we're using fade for the switch. Because we want to check on the value of fade to see is fade 0 or is fade 1. So each one of those is going to get its own case block. So the unique thing about switch is that we have like 2 levels here. So we have the switch, and then the switch is using 2 case blocks. So case, and I'm going to leave the first one as 0, because if fade is 0, I want to start counting up towards 1. So let me give myself a little bit more space so that we can see this all together. Okay. So I'm going to add a sign variable. And attach it to the case. And the variable is fade amount. And the value is a straight up 0.02. Okay. So I don't want to adjust fade by anything. I don't want to adjust the fade amount by anything. I'm just going to change the fade amount to the positive version of fade amount. Okay. And then I'm going to add a second case. So I'm going to go back down. And I'm going to do the same thing for 0. So I'm going to drag the case out here underneath case 0. Type in 1 for the constant. Add a second assigned variable for fade amount. And change it to negative this time. So that when the fade hits 1, it's going to flip the amount of fade. And it should only be 1 for one cycle through, because every time we're adjusting fade by fade amount, whatever fade amount is. Okay. Now, here's something that might, you know what, let's just do this and then you'll see what might have to happen. So let's go ahead and test it and see what happens. And I want you to take notice of what fades in and out. Okay? And then we're going to have to probably figure out how to fix that. Click start. What happened there? Let's see what's going on here. Huh. Oh. Okay. So, although we didn't see anything fading, which is, I think, problematic, but here's why we don't see anything. We need to add a set draw alpha at the end after the if statement, because things have to be redrawn If we set the draw alpha, we only want to set it for the text. We don't want to set it for anything else. So let's fix that, and then see if that fixes everything else. So the easiest way to do this, we want to set it at the very end, but it has to be not inside with all the other code inside the if, because we want this to run at all times. So the easiest way to do it is to go back up to the if, click and drag the set draw alpha to underneath the if. So if I drag it to underneath the if, not to the side, but underneath, it's going to jump all the way down to the bottom. And then we're going to leave the alpha at 1. So that all the stuff that gets drawn, all the other stuff that gets drawn with the alpha of 1. So now, here we go. Hopefully we see what we want, which is the fading of the... Why is it not fading? So obviously we're not seeing our instructions on here, so let's do a little debugging and see if we can figure out what's going on. Okay. So, well, we can't just press debug, so what here's what we can do. Is we can select a brick or a block, press F9 to set sets a breakpoint. And what that's going to do is that when this comes up in the code, it's going to stop, but only if we click on debug. Okay, so we click on a brick, we press F9 to set a breakpoint. A block. Your block will be outlined in red to say it's a breakpoint, and then click debug. Okay, we're debugging in real time. So, it's not dumped me into debugging yet. But you notice the screen's different. It has a graph here. It's got the resource view. We're going to click start. And when we click start, code pops up. So let's take a look. It says, if go is false, which it equates false with the number 0. So objball.go is 0. So this should be true, right? So I'm going to hit F11 to step into this function. So F11, and that just goes me to the, okay, so it says set draw alpha fade. So that seems to be okay. I'm going to hit F11 again. We get the horizontal vertical alignment. We draw the text. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I know what I didn't do. I forgot to change. I figured it out. I forgot to click the relative box. Is that what you did? Yeah, that's all that has to happen. Thank you. All right. That was, yep, right here. I forgot to click the relative box. Now, let's try this again. Well, it should only matter if whatever you named it. So here we go. There we go. Now it should disappear. Yep. So, that's it. We're all done.